stories are the currency of culture. Stories are the currency and by which we gain information, but also we establish norms, we establish expectations, we socialize our ideologies. I mean, if you're at all religious, you learned your religion by stories, right? Even in a secular setting.
Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here today with Marcus Collins. Marcus, welcome to What the Fundraising.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I'm so excited for this conversation. You are here by a little bit of serendipity. We have a mutual friend in Dana Snyder, who's like one of my true best friends. But actually, the way I first came across your work was because of Dr. Ethan Kross, who was my guest on episode 1. Actually, I read Chatter and in 24 hours with a baby in my arms and emailed him, or actually DM'd him on Instagram and was like, I think I want to start a podcast because I want to talk about your book and how it relates to fundraisers. So then I saw him post about your book and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to talk to Marcus. I've gotten to follow you since the book came out and learn so much from you about culture. And I'm excited to dive in today. So tell everyone a little bit about you, what brings you to our conversation today, and then we'll dive in.
You're far too kind. Thank you so much for having me. So I study culture and its impact and influence on human behavior, because I believe there's no external force more influential to human behavior than culture, full stop. And when you hear that, people go, yeah, totally. That makes all the sense in the world. But if you ask 5 people to define culture, you get 55 different answers. And that's a problem. Because if we can't define this thing that is so disproportionately influential, then it leaves us unable to actually leverage or harness its power. And that's problematic. So much of my work is not only kind of creating a Rosetta Stone by which we can talk about culture and sort of mechanizing what culture is, the system of systems, so that we're able to identify it and sort of do something about it, but also helping companies understand how they're able to foster a culture internally so that they might be able to interact with it externally.
Okay. All right. So let's break it down for us. Tell us, what is culture and sort of what does it look like and feel like? Like, give us some context and then we'll dive into sort of the way we're going to talk about culture today.
Sure. So I think about culture through a sociological lens, particularly through the lens of a gentleman by the name of Emil Durkheim. Emil Durkheim, one of the founding fathers of sociology, would talk about culture as a system of conventions and expectations that demarcate who we are and govern what people like us do. It's a system, right? That carves out the place that we occupy in the phenomenal social world in which we cohabitate, identifies what's acceptable and expected of people like us. So it's anchored in our identity, who we are, and all its complexity, all its intersectionality, right? And all of its sort of contradictions, our identity. And because of who we are, we see the world a certain way, right? When we say who we are, I don't mean demographics, the labels that we affix to people. I mean who we are based on how we self-identify and all the intersectionality that makes up who we are. I'm a professor at the University of Michigan. That's an individual referent. I'm in a fraternity called Phi Beta Sigma. That's a group referent. I'm a father to 2 little girls, Georgia and Ivy. That's an abstract referent. And each one of those monikers together make up who I am, right? The alchemy of them make up who I am. And because of who I am, I see the world a certain way. I have a set of beliefs and ideologies like we all do. And the thing about those beliefs and ideologies is that they are subjective. That's why for some, a cow is leather, for others it's a deity, and for some it's dinner. But which one is it? It's all of those things, depending on who you are and how you self-identify. For some, a rug is decor. For others, it's a souvenir. And for some, it's a place of worship. Well, which one is it? It's all those things, depending on who you are. So because of who we are, we see the world a certain way. And then we subsequently navigate the world based on that perception, based on that worldview, right? The artifacts that I don. These are the human-made objects that we use to signify our identity or our cultural subscription, be it sort of what we wear, how we adorn ourselves, how we style our hair, If you self-identify as a Catholic, you wear a rosary. If you
Mm.
self-identify as, as a certain sect of Jewishness, you wear a yarmulke. These are all artifacts that are signifiers of our identity, not because of what they are, but because of who we are. So we have these
Mm.
artifacts that we don. They're behaviors that are normative. These are the social norms of what people like us do. It's interesting. I feel like here in the States, we're sort of facing this dilemma of tipping. Like
Mm.
everywhere you go, people ask you to leave a tip, right? It's like,
Mm.
I go to Five Guys and now they're like, hey, they're like, the screen's going to ask you a few questions. It's like, I know what these questions are. I'm not tipping you. But it's tipping is a normal thing in certain contexts, but now
Mm.
we're being asked to tip in places that are not normal. And we're finding a bit of a
Mm.
rub. Like, what do I do here? Right?
Mm.
These what we call social norms or rituals or traditions, they are paths that make navigating life easy. It helps us
Mm.
understand what people like us ought to do. Then their language. These are the words we use, not just our national language, but like the vernacular, the colloquialisms, the slang, the code words, right? The shorthanded
Mm.
words. Like knowing if I say something is
Mm.
bad, I mean Michael Jackson bad, or
Mm.
I guess Michael Jackson bad, depending on how you look at it. But you see what I'm saying, right? I love
Yeah.
Michael Jackson. Don't get me wrong. I love Michael. Huge fan. My favorite artist. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
The idea is that because of who we are, we see the world a certain way. Because we see the world a certain way, we navigate life accordingly through the artifacts, behaviors, and language that we adopt. And then lastly, we express ourselves through shared work, shared
Mm.
production, what we call cultural production. Is music, art, literature, film, dance, pottery, poetry, brands and branded products, institutions and organizations become ways by which we sort of peacock ourselves to the world. They're ways by
Mm.
which we project our identity. And
Mm.
the collection of these systems or systems of systems together make up our culture. And it essentially acts as a governing operating system of what people like
Mm.
us do. Whether we are aware of it or not, we navigate life based on our cultural subscription and how we transit the world through these cultural lenses that we call perspective.
Okay, I have so many questions. I was like
Mm.
writing notes down. Okay, so my first question is, do people have different cultural lenses that get applied circumstantially? And what is that? Can you talk about that for a second?
Absolutely. So because of our intersectionality, we tend to sort of highlight certain moments versus the other. I don't know if the analogy I think about is like there's a movie called Split
Mm.
where the character has multiple personalities, and
Mm.
a personality may be present in one moment. They'll say the person's holding the light. And
Mm.
the same thing goes with us. In certain settings, an
Mm.
identity marker of ours holds the light. It's sort of like when I'm with
Mm.
my boys, like I go into a certain vernacular, I behave a certain way, I act a certain way when I'm with my people, right? But when I'm with my kids, I act a certain way, I talk a certain way, I am a certain way. I am still Marcus. I don't feel like I'm not being myself in any of those contexts. It's just those contexts have a set of expectations. For instance, I grew up, watching Eddie Murphy movies and, loving stand-up comedy. And there are moments where if I'm at the bar with my friends, I feel completely licensed to tell Eddie Murphy jokes. I feel licensed to do that. I'm not as good as Eddie. I don't do it as Eddie, but like I could do it. And in fact, they'll actually sort of finish the joke in unison with me because they know the
Mm.
jokes, right? And while I feel totally licensed to tell those jokes at the bar with my friends, I would never tell those jokes in the church sanctuary with those exact friends. Why?
Mm.
Because the context of the environment matters, right? The things that I post on Instagram, I wouldn't post on LinkedIn, right?
Mm.
Because the context of the environment matters. And therefore, to remain good standing citizens within the group of people that we're with in that context, we abide by what is culturally acceptable and expected of us. And we act accordingly.
Mm. Okay. So, but it sounds like there's this part, and maybe this is the identity versus culture, but I'm sort of curious about like our consciousness around culture. Like you said that thing about tipping, and I was like, "Oh my God. I've totally fallen for it."
Of course
You're
you have.
right. I tip in every environment now.
Yes.
And like, I have never stopped to be like, is this appropriate? And I honestly, until you said that, didn't even notice the change. Actually, one time I did because it came on a consulting contract, and I was like, did you mean to leave this on? Because it was so unexpected that
Yeah.
versus, and so that's so interesting. So it seems like there are these cultural norms, and then there's also the way in which our identity aligns with them or not. But sometimes it sounds like maybe there's consciousness around it, and then sometimes there's not.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we're at our best, we're not thinking at all. We're in
Right.
autopilot, right? And this is sort of what the behavioral science has been telling us, that we think that we navigate life making tons of decisions, tons of rational, data-driven decisions. The truth of the matter is we don't. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we spend most of our lives, most of our days making decisions on autopilot, right? Just kind of responding to them subconsciously, unconsciously,
Mm-hmm.
just kind of acting. And as a result, our decisions are made based on these shortcut heuristics, these cognitive biases that are essentially shaped and manifested based on what people like us do. So the
Mm-hmm.
idea of tipping, whether you are aware of it or not, you go, well, I don't want to be a dirtbag, so I'm going to tip.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be seen as a bad person, so I'm going to tip them, right? And it's almost like we do without even thinking,
Mm-hmm.
especially in places where the norm is so satisfied or so salient. For instance,
Mm-hmm.
if you go out to dinner somewhere and you get the bill, you sat down, you had a waitress or waiter, you sat down and you didn't tip, someone would be like, what is wrong with you? Are you kidding me, dude? Like, what is wrong with you, man? Like, I'm starting to second guess you
Mm-hmm.
because of this thing that is not objective, but totally subjective, because it is normal. And we make these decisions so that we stay in good standing status with what is considered socially normal. I mean, normal. What is
Mm-hmm.
normal? Right? What's normal for some isn't normal for all, because
Mm-hmm.
normality, air quotes, normality is all socially constructed. Go back to Eddie Murphy, for instance. I read about this in my book. I grew up watching Eddie Murphy at an age where I was far too young to watch it, but I did anyway. And I remember when Raw and Delirious were being put on Netflix. I remember, like, when I got the email saying, new titles added to Netflix, Raw and Delirious. Tell my wife, yo, do not bother me tonight, because I'm about to rewatch Raw and Delirious. Like, put the kids to bed. I ain't involved. I'm tapping out of Parenthood tonight. I'm watching Eddie Murphy. And I hadn't seen it in forever, right? Because I had it on like
Mm-hmm.
VHS, so I hadn't seen it forever. And I start watching Raw, and I am
Mm-hmm.
clutching my pearls the entire time. Like, you can't say what are you doing? My goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew the bits by heart, and I had heard them for decades. The movie didn't change, but I had changed. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because the cultural expectations to which I subscribe my identity has changed. And unaware of this, like, not even thinking about this, right? If I were anyone else, I'm like, oh, I can't watch this, and just kind of turn it off. But because this is what I study, I'd like sort of think like, what are you feeling, Marcus? What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
You're feeling some cognitive dissonance, that
Mm-hmm.
the behavior that you're partaking in is disconnected, incongruent with your identity and what people like you do. Therefore, you find yourself uncomfortable. And these
Mm-hmm.
decisions shape almost everything we do: what we buy, where we go, how we style ourselves, who we date, if we date, who we marry, where we vacation, if we give, how we give. All of these things that we engage in on a daily basis in social life is constructed based upon what is socially acceptable.
Okay, I promise for listeners that we're going to transition to talk about fundraising in a second, but I really love that you gave that example of the movie. I had a very similar experience recently with my daughter around Mary Poppins.
Huh.
And like watching Mary Poppins, and the husband is called the master of the house. And the wife at one point gets told she's not allowed to leave. She has to go sit in a corner in a chair and watch him make a decision.
Oof, oof.
And I was like, and listen, I'm not trying to ruin Mary Poppins for everyone. And my daughter loves Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
But what it did require was me sitting her down and having a really real conversation about some of the things that she was seeing.
That's right.
And how things have changed and what things look like and how our house deals with, you know, all these different things. Right. And so, and we actually had a very similar situation happen with Curious George. Again, not to be like a buzzkill, but like there, if you look at an old Curious George book, like it's pretty outrageous, like the whole thing. Like it's like the man in the yellow hat like takes a bag at like traps George in a bag in Africa, puts him on a boat to bring him to a zoo, and also when he gets on the boat, he puts a cigar in the monkey's mouth. Like my daughter's like, what's that? And I'm like, I don't even like, what's happening? And like, how did I read this for so like, right. This was like such a huge part of my childhood. I loved Curious George.
Yeah.
And I think like the new stuff has changed. So everybody was like, oh my God, my kid watches Curious George. Like, I think like, don't worry, like it has updated with the culture. But to your point, that's such a great example of experiencing cognitive dissonance that I think a lot of people can really relate to. So I so appreciate you sharing that. So one of the questions I have before we transition to really talk specifically about culture around fundraising is about time, how long it takes to create or shift culture. Like sometimes it feels like things can happen fast, and then sometimes it feels like we really can't let go of things. Yeah. So what is that about?
Yeah. So the literature refers to this as fast culture and slow culture. Fast culture are the things that move very, very, very quickly. And slow culture are the things that kind of move at a glacier pace. But the point is that everything's always moving. Now, if you think about that system of systems, identity, how we see the world, how we navigate the world, and cultural production, the things that are most visible, those are the things that change pretty quickly, right? What we wear, fashion, how we talk, slang, what we do, these sort of rituals or traditions, those things change over time. Even cultural production, right? What music is hot right now, what the new TikTok dance might be, or what movie is sort of the thing. Like these things change very, very quickly, some faster than others. We call those fads or trends. What's trending right now? That's what we call fast culture. But the things that change very, very, very slowly are the things that happen underneath the surface. If like fast culture, the trends are the things that you can observe like a iceberg, we know the majority of it is beneath the surface that you can't see. And those are the beliefs and ideologies. And they change very slowly, very, very slowly. So what ends up sort of creating catalysts of change, it requires a far more powerful exogenous shock to the system to change ideologies and beliefs. And exogenous shocks to the system are essentially things that are outside of what is normal, what typically happens, right? Like a new movie comes out, a new product is released, some scandal happens in the news, something happens in politics that goes, whoa. Did you see that? Oh my goodness. Did you see that? Will Smith slaps Chris Rock. Oh my goodness. Right? Unbelievable. That's a shock to the system. And what happens is that when those shocks to the system happen, we go, Mallory, did you see that? You go, oh my goodness, I saw that too. Oh my goodness, what's going on here? And we start to have discourse to decide, is it acceptable? And typically that discourse impacts fast culture because music, movies, fashion, those things seem to be more cyclical or happen more frequently than sort of big, massive shocks to the system that change what we believe. And you can look at things in politics in particular that, you know, the Overton window has shifted so much that we're almost sort of numb to it. You know, like remember the time when mass shootings would happen and we would, as a society, we would question everything about like what is normal. Now it happens and we go, that sucks. thoughts and prayers, and then on to the next thing, because it
Mm,
has become so normal. It's no longer as an exogenous shock to the system. So to answer your question,
mm,
these shocks to the system, they reverberate into the population. And the first thing that they impact are the visible fast cultural mechanisms. And they start to eat away at, or some way kind of nudge, the slow cultural things. But the timelines are always out of sync.
okay. There's something really interesting here. But before I go there, can the way that we behave in fast culture influence our beliefs and ideologies?
Oh yes, oh yes. I mean, those things are they are they call it there's a Greek god called Janus. It's two-faced entity. One is facing the other, one faces is the other. And they're supposed to be sort of watching the gates of heaven and hell, sort of the
Mm,
mythology of it. They're custodians, if you will,
mm,
of the living world. And it's no wonder we call janitors because it comes from
mm,
Janus, right? So the idea
mm,
is that these things are happening at the same time. The on ramp and off ramp aren't terribly discrete. Instead,
mm,
one is informing the other. So what we believe and how we see the world is reflected in what we wear, how we talk, what we do, and what we consume. But over time, what we consume starts to impact what we believe, because we
mm,
constantly try to find ourselves in harmony, right? Find ourselves
mm.
in cognitive equilibrium.
Okay. Okay. Oh my gosh. I'm like, do you have all day? Because I have a lot of questions. Okay. I'm gonna restrain myself.
Okay.
So let's talk about the culture of fundraising.
Mhm.
Because I think that this is a really interesting look. So you talk a lot about how brands and organizations can build culture that helps them find their like tribes and congregations and really use it. You tell some great stories in the book around Patagonia. You've worked with some incredible folks. And Dana Snyder's podcast, Missions to Movements with You, I'm going to tell folks like for that stuff, like go listen to it. It is amazing. The strategies and the suggestions are amazing. But I want to talk about something a little bit different, which
Okay.
is the societal culture around fundraising
Yes.
and the impact that that is having both on our kind of social support networks and
Mhm.
also on the people responsible for moving the money into the organizations that provide those social supports. So we have been seeing giving in decline. If the numbers continue at the rate that they're at, there will be no nonprofit sector by 2050. That is not that far away.
Yeah.
The beliefs that we hold, collectively, individually around money and philanthropy, are diverse, but there's a lot of history of the nonprofit sector and a lot of the sort of the birth of the nonprofit sector really from the Gilded Age on that sort of established philanthropy as this pretty inequitable and like problematic system, right?
Hmm.
Where people got to put money where they wanted to, direct it how they wanted to, and just enough to avoid taxes or make them feel
Mm.
good, but maybe
Yeah.
not enough to actually ever really solve those problems. And there was also a lot of kind of social pressures around things, right? Like guilt. People would sit around country clubs and pass these cards around to each other, and everyone just make a donation to each other's charity. And a lot of the ways that like the origins of fundraising led to also a lot of sort of scarcity beliefs that are
Mm.
framed around the sector, a lot around sort of value and power related to money and kind of what we value.
Sure.
And those beliefs and ideologies that really formed the sector have led to these transactional fundraising practices that feel bad to fundraisers and they feel bad to donors. And
Mm.
and my argument, we're seeing in the sector this decline in giving, and we're seeing a tremendous staffing crisis. We're seeing high turnover of fundraisers, people burning out at extremely high rates, and we've been dealing with them in the sector really separately. And my argument is that they are actually caused by the same thing and
Mm.
they can be solved together. It is about how we fundraise. And so we won't get into like my stuff there, but culture plays a big role. I talk about in my book that's coming out in October about the like stigma and just like all these different things that add to this super complicated environment. So there's a lot we can talk about in here. What comes to mind at first as I sort of frame that up?
Oh, me, I think about the institution of fundraising, the institution of giving.
Mm,
It comes, I think you nailed it. And you said it so eloquently. It comes with so many cultural bags. The baggage makes
mm,
it provides a negative frame off the jump.
mm,
There is the erosion of trust in
mm,
institutions. That like if I'm giving to this, do people actually really give it? We hear
mm,
story the people who in need get it. We've heard stories about mismanagement of funds from a city level all the way to a philanthropic level. So
mm,
there's this erosion of trust between those who give and the actual organization who gets it. There is this idea that giving is for the privileged. Giving
mm,
is a byproduct of surplus. It's a byproduct of
mm,
access capacity. You're like, look, I'm barely living. How am I gonna give something to someone else?
mm,
It's like when you're flying, to say, put your mask on first before you help
mm,
the person next to you help your child with your mask. There's this sort of cognitive association that giving is an act of privilege, not an
mm,
act of humanity.
mm,
Uh, Also comes to mind for me this idea of obligation that,
mm,
when people are asking you to give, you feel obligated to do it as opposed to an altruistic thing. And therefore, when you feel obligated, your agency seems to be taken away from you, and
mm,
like we crave agency, which is ironic
mm,
because we don't have very little agency anyway, but we crave agency. So the idea that our agency is being taken from us, we try to escape it altogether. If someone's like,
mm,
hey, can I talk to you about whatever? You go, no, 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 I want you, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank you, no, thank
mm,
you. All right, I feel obligated to do this if I'm a good person. And
mm,
and even when it's presented, it's like, $1 can go so long, very
mm,
much transactional, as opposed to where is the me in this? Which
mm,
brings another thing with the institution is that it's not terribly conspicuous.
mm,
Conspicuous consumption becomes an identity project as opposed to a transactional exchange. How might we make giving more conspicuous? So the things that come to mind. I mean, there's a lot there, and the thing about each one of these things that they're all culturally mediated.
Right. Okay, so let me give you an example of something and then maybe we flush out or just sort of like riff off of this difference. So one of the things, like all of those things I think are our perceptions of what giving is, right? And yet, when people give, oxytocin is released, they
Yeah,
feel connected, they feel good. And I believe that people are generous, like at their core. And we watch this play out in really interesting ways. Like, think about GoFundMe, right? Think about when the GoFundMe is shared, that nobody knows anything about how that money is going to be spent. The goal of the initial thing was like $15,000. But because there was this cultural moment around whatever happened to that person, all of a sudden they've raised $3 million. Nobody's questioning any of those things. People are not asking for anything in return, but they are commenting a lot on that GoFundMe. They're wanting to be a part of it. It's feeling good to them to participate. It's like everything that you said, like they don't feel obligated. They want to. They like it's flipping everything. So
that's
like
right.
what is it? Like what has happened in that moment that doesn't then get applied to our beliefs and ideologies about like what has happened in that moment is sort of one question. And
Sure.
then like, why do those moments, all these moments of positive generosity not get applied to our beliefs and ideology about what giving is?
Well, I mean, those are really strong questions. I think for a GoFundMe like object, a few things happen. One, it's social in nature. Like you
Mm.
don't let me go to GoFundMe or Kickstarter.com and just see what's happening here. No, no. Like you heard about it because someone was like, "This is amazing. You need to see this. This is unbelievable. You got to check this out." And in those pitches on GoFundMe and on Kickstarter, they're all telling stories, and those stories evoke the emotional, and you find yourself connected to it. So it comes to you through a source where there is credence, as opposed to someone selling you. Someone's like, "Yo, Marcus, you got to see this." So at its core, at the onset, it's a warm lead, right? From a sales perspective, it's a warm lead, right? It's a recommendation, so I'm more inclined to check it out. I check it out and I'm like, "Whoa, this is unbelievable." Now it's got like serotonins racing. I'm like, "My goodness, I'm feeling good. This is wild." And then the act of giving, to your point, releases oxytocins. Now I feel like I've done something good. I'm a good person. Look at what I've done. And it's highly conspicuous. It's visible. I've gave, right? And there is a return, but the return is always like, they don't treat it like a marketplace relationship. It's a social relationship. You're helping someone, right? I'm down on my luck. Something happened. Help me. I'm going to help this person. And it feels like the little bit that I can give, there is transparency that it hit the mark that is going to that we're after. In some cases, it's like, what is my little 25 cents doing? What's my little $500 doing to this thing? Because the cause is so enormous. It's so big, we're like ending world hunger. Right? It's like, it's just so massive and so esoteric that it's hard for our heads to get around. But helping someone pay for their doctor bills, all you need is $25,000. You go, well, I could do that. But it's sort of why the behavioral science talks about this a lot, that people will get invested in a story about a kid who falls in a well, and everyone rallies around, like they're bought into it, and they're like trying to help, and they're doing everything they can, they're giving, and all the neighborhood comes out to sort of support this kid who falls in a well, where thousands of people are victims of like some natural disaster. We go, ooh, that's tough. But what is my little thing going to do? Not much, right? It's the socialization of it that helps. It's the finite nature of it that helps. There is the transparency that's helpful. Then there is the public nature of it all that goes a long way. The alchemy of all those things creates for a more likely scenario where we're going to move.
Okay. So let's say, because there are a lot of platforms now that work to create similar experiences, but tied to a nonprofit and tied to a more explicit, tailored campaign with storytelling. And I think, though, that we have seen a lot of examples of people getting behind those and being excited about being involved. We see more participation in the chat. We sort of see it mirror what we see on GoFundMe in certain ways, but be about a part of sort of a bigger social problem, right? But I feel like people are having more and more positive experiences giving in certain ways. And maybe they're also having simultaneously negative experiences giving in certain ways. But I'm sort of, part of me is wondering, like, why don't those positive external things seem to be shifting at all some of the like underlying internal beliefs and ideologies?
Well, I think that we do have a tendency to add more permanence to the negative than to the positive. And when we're already operating in a frame that is negative about giving in general, it only supports or underscores, provides evidence for the negative. So we have permanence for the negative, and there's more evidence to support the negative. So we go, that was good, but yeah, that was good, but that's the power. That is why culture is so unbelievably powerful, is that we have to change the framing first if we are to provide better weights to the negative and the positive.
Okay. So All right. So, because I definitely don't want to end with fundraisers being like, oh my God, Mallory, you really were quite the, negative Nancy here. So, I want to talk about there's this interesting sort of phenomenon in the nonprofit sector and around like what we sort of call sectorism, which is like when something negative happens to a nonprofit, a CEO sort of gets caught spending too much money on their
Yeah.
office remodel, for example. It does seem to really like, maybe because it validates people's underlying fears about the sector, but it gets like applied to people as if it's like, see, nonprofits like do
Like
this. Whereas like there's bad behavior. When Enron
everywhere.
happened, nobody was like, every business has
That's
corrupt
right.
leadership
That's
and
right.
is embezzling. Never. But we see it applied to the nonprofit sector in a totally different way. And I was thinking about your work, and I was thinking about Patagonia, who, by the way, they're like kind of hosting my book tour, which is really cool
Amazing.
through their stores. So I'm getting to drop into stores around the country. They're
Oh,
bringing together
that's
their
so
nonprofit communities.
cool.
Yeah, they are amazing. They're everything that we see in their culture externally. They are all of that
That's
and
so
more
cool.
internally. And so, but I was thinking about the way that, okay, yes, maybe we don't let culture in certain ways define everything, like Enron define the business culture, but we do see brands like Patagonia really stand out and define themselves differently. And so when I think about the opportunity that nonprofits have, given everything that we talked about that is happening in the ecosystem around them and some of the sort of maybe assumptions about nonprofits generally, they still have the opportunity to pull a Patagonia,
Oh yeah.
right? And
Oh
like
yeah.
redefine sort of who they are and build culture around that in a way that uses some of the things that you're talking about, where they sort of redefine the construct in which they're doing some of these activities so that people can both behave differently
Yep.
and start to adopt those ideologies. So in like the last 10 minutes together, tell us how they do that.
Better stories.
Mm,
Better stories more frequently. Stories are the currency of culture.
mm,
Stories are the currency and by which we gain information, but also we establish norms. We establish
mm,
expectations. We socialize our ideologies. I mean, if you're at all
mm,
religious, you learned your religion by stories, right?
mm,
Even in a secular setting, urban legends are sort of the ways by which we identify the taboos. And my goodness, gossip is like the best form of storytelling. It's a way by which
mm,
we self govern without an authoritative figure, right? We say, hey, you heard what happened to Mallory? No, tell me. Girl, let me tell
mm.
you. And when we do that, we're basically saying, here's the behavior that's not acceptable, and these are the social consequences of it. And we go, I know
Mm,
what to do now as a member of this community. Stories are unbelievably powerful and remarkably social. So if we
mm,
want to outrun the negative frames by which we operate in the world of giving, we tell better stories that create better frames, better stories.
mm,
And it seems so obvious, but the obvious isn't obvious if someone points it out to you. We don't tell great stories in the world of giving, in the world of philanthropy. Like my aunt Anne used to say, people with the truth tell the truth like it's a lie, and the people with lies tell a lie like it's the truth. It's like there's this sort of sheepishness to it, as opposed to telling the truth and telling the story with great conviction. I mean, that's the difference between a Patagonia and a North Face and a Columbia, right? Like
mm,
their products are parody on the surface
mm,
to the average consumer. In fact, I do this with my MBA students. I put a slide on the board and I have a Patagonia fleece, a Columbia fleece, and a North Face fleece, and I cover the logo. And I ask
mm.
them, to whom do these fleeces belong? And some of them are actually wearing the fleeces on the jacket. 100% of the time, they get it wrong. 100% of the time.
Mm,
Like, we cannot tell the difference between these things, the product in and of themselves. But as soon as I reveal the logo, they go, oh, yeah. And they'll pay a premium for
mm,
Patagonia. Why? Because of what it means. Why does
mm,
Patagonia have that meaning? Because of the stories that it's told. And through those
mm,
stories, we have socialized it and have constructed a shared meaning of what Patagonia is all about, minimizing our invasiveness on the planet. and therefore we're willing to pay a
Mm.
premium for it. The same thing goes with giving. You tell better stories, the meaning starts to shift, and we are willing to pay a premium. In this case, give, not because of what it is, but because of who we are and our congruence with the belief system of the thing in which we are supporting.
Ooh, okay. There's a part of me that's like, just stop right there, Mallory. That's the message to like leave people with. I think it's so good, but I am going to ask you one more
Let's
question,
do it. Yeah.
which is because that quote from your aunt, was it your aunt who said
Yeah.
that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, that quote, that needs to be on a billboard
Super
somewhere.
powerful.
Like,
Yeah.
it's so powerful. And when I hear that, what I think about though is the like hundreds of fundraisers that I work with who, where that comes from is like perfectionism and fear,
Yeah.
right? It comes from this, like, what if I say it wrong? What if I get
Yeah.
it wrong? What if I don't include the right detail? What if, or, you know, telling a new story involves 45 reviews from everybody on their team and their whole board. Like, you teach Dr. BJ Fogg's work, who we both like love and geek out around. So like, what's the tiny storytelling habit that
Yeah.
can help these organizations dip their toe in
Yeah.
to telling better stories?
Yeah, I mean, like BJ Fogg would say, like we always want to lean towards ease. What's easiest, right?
Mm,
Motivation, you can have the motivation sky high, right?
mm,
But if the ease, simplicity isn't high, it's never going to be adopted. So I think the idea is to lean towards simplicity by not making sweeping changes. Make
mm,
small changes over a period of time. dy over dx, dy over
mm,
dx, derivatives. Small changes over a period of time, and the marginal aggregation of gains will find us in
mm,
another place, right? Find us in a better place. You know, we often think about like big pendulum swings. I want to make a massive splash, and if it doesn't give me a million new whatever, a billion new
mm,
whatever, it was a failure. No, 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 no.
mm,
Anything like sustainable change happens over time. It's almost
mm.
like if I saw someone on the street and was like, oh my gosh, you are gorgeous. Would you marry me?" They'd be like, "Get away from me, creep." No, no, right? You may exchange numbers and you make text messages because you don't call because only creeps call. You text
Mm,
message, and then we get coffee, and then we have lunch. Then maybe we have dinner. Then you meet my friends meet your friends. We could be friends, do this every
mm,
weekend. Like these things happen over time. Relationships
mm,
happen over time. And the same thing goes when we're telling stories. We're trying to establish relationships, not transactional relationships, but
mm,
meaningful relationships. So get on first base by just one small change. People will approve of small change. Big
mm,
sweeping changes, that's hard to do.
mm.
Small change and make more small changes every day, small changes. And the aggregation of those marginal gains will get to bigger and better outcomes.
Okay, such good advice, and I think about that in terms of these moments of connection too, right? Storytellings don't have to be stories that we tell that are impactful, don't have to be this huge big curated video and an impact report. There are these micro moments of connections
That's
that
right.
stories, like there was this guy during COVID, I think, or maybe it was after COVID, who was a librarian, and he would go on Instagram and just tell these 30-second, 60-second stories of a sweet moment he observed in the library that day. Like
Yeah.
a grandmother coming in with their kid, and this is the book they read, and here's what he noticed about their relationship. And like, it was just these tiny, but it was like every single one, you were there, you
Yeah.
know, and you were building connection to him, to libraries, to all the things. So, my gosh, so much good advice in here. Tell people who are listening to this, where can they go to, where do you want them to go to get the book? Is there anything else that you have coming out that you want to make sure they are clued in for? Where should they go to follow you, learn more from you, all the things?
Yeah. So you can get the book where all books are sold, from the Amazons of the world to the Barnes and Nobles to the mom and pops. The paperback version of the book comes out very shortly. So September 10th, it hits newsstands or hits bookshelves. So you can get it there, the new version, which has a new chapter, an epilogue, and so
Ooh.
a few new stories. You can find me across the social web at Mark to the C, MarcTothec, or just Dr. Marcus Collins stuff typically pops up. I got pretty good SEO happening.
Fantastic. I will make sure all the links are included below as well. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom, for sharing this with us, for being willing to sort of wade into these waters with me today. I really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. I hope it's helpful.